And our fourth item on the agenda is, briefing, about a stakeholder group on the Ban the Box issue. Councilmember Cassar, do you want to take the lead on this?
Yeah, sure. Committee members, our city staff worked really hard with a really broad variety of stakeholders, from interested citizens to advocacy organizations, directly affected folks and businesses. Throughout the summer, we were supposed to get a staff report back and a stakeholder report back for our September meeting. So for today, the staff are still working with legal to get some policy recommendations down, and so they'll be making their report in October, and we can get citizen input in October. But the stakeholders, or several of the stakeholders, were very prepared to come present to us in September, and since we have such a thin agenda, I think it makes sense for them to prime us with the information that they want to present to us so that we have something to think about, and hopefully are prepared to make a recommendation in our October meeting if we're so ready. But I think since we had the time, it might be good to, I thought it would be good for them to come and present what their recommendations are to us, and we can ask some questions and think about it for the next month. So I think they're here in the audience.
I do. It's up right there. First, thank you, council members, for the opportunity to speak to you. Can you guys hear me?
Would 10 minutes? I understand from Councilmember Cassar that your presentation is about 10 minutes.
Correct.
Okay, great. Thanks.
So my name is Jacqueline Kahn, and back in May, as Councilmember Cassar said, the resolution of the city was presented to have stakeholders look at fair chance hiring policies that apply to private employers. And so we represent some of the stakeholders from that group to talk about fair chance hiring in Austin. Some of our stakeholders include these lovely, reputable nonprofits, advocacy organizations, and church before you, as well as other Austinites like myself. I'm formerly incarcerated for something I did when I was 19, and after release I earned my bachelor's degree from UT and my master's in science and public policy from Carnegie Mellon. Yet to this day I have never received one call back from an application where I've had to check yes to having a criminal background. So for that reason, I'm here to talk about why fair chance hiring is good. And then I'm going to pass it over to Brian to talk about what a fair Austin would look like. And then to wrap it up, Lauren is going to talk about some of the must-haves that a fair chance hiring policy would have. I just want to step back and say something I forgot, that following this, we're going to be darkening your doorsteps to talk about this a little bit more in the following days, and also to hand present a city ordinance that we've put together, proposed, that we've worked with the National Employment Law Project to put together what would make sense for Austin. So, why it's good. First, fairness and equality. As many of us know, people of color are disproportionately affected by mass incarceration, mass arrest, and these current policies are things that disproportionately affect people of color. So if we add that to the bias that goes with having a record, all of this creates a perfect storm for unfair hiring practices that actually prohibit real diversity in the workplace, right? And that's not the goal. So one of the things to think about is fair chance hiring for private employers actually increases the pool of qualified applicants. When we think about how 1 out of 3 people have a record that will show up on a check, you know, that's an opportunity to really connect Austinites with meaningful employment. And the best way to do that is to unbias the hiring process. Fair chance hiring also creates economic growth in that it's a boost. It's a boost in sales tax. It's a boost in the local economy. That inevitably happens anytime that we're connecting people with meaningful employment, right? Or even anytime we're just connecting people with employment. It also helps create safer communities, because one of the top tools to success for somebody re-entering is if they can find employment. One of the reasons for that is, as we all know, jobs and having positive social professional network is one of the key indicators of if anyone will be successful, returning or not. And if we think back about how people of color are disproportionately affected by this, we can think about fair chance hiring as, a vital lifeline that Many communities in Austin have been waiting for a long time to get their foot in the door of economic success and economic stability that this policy would really help create. So it should be a best practice in Austin. It is currently something that we're doing with Travis County and the city of Austin, and it's something that for companies that have national headquarters in New York or San Francisco or Seattle where they have implemented fair chance hiring for private employers, they've also made it a best practice for their offices in Austin for some of these companies. And so one of the things to think about is, instead of performing a background check for every applicant, we're just performing background checks for applicants that are up to the conditional offer. So it takes out some of the unnecessary work, and in the end, it saves a lot of time and money for everyone involved. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Brian. Thank you.
Thank you again for your time. My name is Brian McGivern with the Texas Civil Rights Project, and I'm just going to offer a couple items very briefly as an attorney from the community. One thing is that, as has been mentioned, this is far from an unprecedented policy proposal. Many cities and states around the country, both Democrat and Republican, have implemented policies very much like this one. It is not a partisan issue. It's simply a smart issue, or a smart policy, including several major employers, Target, Home Depot, Conch Industries, I think. It's definitely not partisan. One important thing to think about is that this does not prohibit an employer from using a background check, not at all. It's just a question of timing, whether or not the employer meets a person and begins to weigh them on themselves, on their merits as a person before, or whether they do this at an earlier juncture and judge them based on a set of paperwork. It's merely doing it later in the process, so the person can really be evaluated on their own merit. Of course, in most employment situations, background checks are not legally required, not at all. In fact, a ban-the-box policy actually invites employers to more fully, or to avoid violating guidance that the EEOC, the Economic Opportunity, or Equal Economic Opportunity, the EEOC, has already said that a blanket denial of someone based on criminal history is going to be a violation of Title VII, most likely, because of the disproportionate impact that our criminal justice system has on communities of color. Banning the box is merely inviting employers to shield themselves against unknowingly violating that provision of Title VII. And it is also a cost-saving device because it involves less administrative overhead work. And it doesn't require any employer to hire anyone that they don't want to hire. It's simply a question of who you meet and when you meet them and what amount of information you're using to base your decision on. Employers are still free to select the best candidate for the positions that they are offering. Thank you, and with that, I will hand the clicker over to Lauren. You click it.
Okay, so hi, my name is Lauren Johnson, and I'm going to talk to you about the must-haves if we implement a policy like this, which is absolutely a must-have. So one of the biggest components that we must have is that it should include all private employers. The second thing that we think that is imperative for it to have is that the background check is done after the conditional offer of employment, and that is crucial to this being an effective policy. And it's also going to be helpful with this being a policy. It will make it an effective tool if we do it that way instead of some other way. The other must-have that I think is very important is education and outreach. The City of Austin and Travis County have already implemented this, so it's not like we don't know how to do it. So the knowledge is there. But in the event that we should need some assistance and guidance, I am also part of the Reentry Planning Council, which also has an employment presentation put together. And there are a lot of other organizations that would be willing to collaborate to assist that wouldn't cost the city any money to do so. Another must-have is using DPS records to give an applicant the copy of that record so that they could dispute anything that's wrong or even explain, because sometimes a situation isn't what it seems on the outside. Using DPS records is vital because a lot of other organizations out there, you can spend $10 and get Joe Blow's criminal history, and there's a high likelihood that there is a lot of erroneous information in that. So we feel like DPS records are the only way to go, and definitely that the applicant should be able to receive a copy of that. The other thing that we feel is a must-have is that education should be the means of compliance. So rather than being punitive in our efforts, we want to see employers be educated about why this is good for them and why this is good for our community. But also, we don't necessarily feel like this is going to be a huge ordeal, right? I feel like Austin is progressive enough that we won't really have too much work to do, especially in the area of civil fines for violators. I anticipate that we'll have a lot of people complying with the law, but also that the education component is the best way to address any issues for noncompliance. So, as a look back, fair chance hiring policies in Austin would ensure that Austin is seen as the fair and progressive city that we know it to be. It would build a stronger community, and it will boost the local economy. So with that, I will close it, and we are happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Members, any questions?
Which one? Ms. Kahn, thank you for sharing with us that you had been having trouble getting some callbacks. I know that's a personal thing to share, but if you could you tell us a little bit more about sort of how many jobs it is you've applied to and what that process has been like for you here in town?
Sure. Well, it's too many to count, to be honest. I graduated Carnegie Mellon in 2011, and since then I haven't been unemployed since then, but I've through several times had to apply for many jobs. And on any job where I've put that I have a master's degree, that I have an undergraduate degree, that I'm really good at project management and writing interoffice memos, or whatever it is that I'm applying for, that I'm especially qualified for, the thing that's weighted most heavily on my application is that when I was 19 years old, I committed a very stupid crime. That was 14 years ago. I'm 33 now, and that shouldn't be the thing that's the most relevant that I have to live with for the rest of my life. And I just want to say it's not just me. There's probably tens of thousands of folks in Austin that are living with this for the rest of their lives.
Thanks. Mm-hmm. And then my last question was for Mr. Washington, since he's here. But since we put this together at the committee, I've gotten some, if you could pop up really quick, I've gotten some concerned folks contacting me, and it seems that their two primary concerns have been, one, if this was going to create a lot of additional work for employers, and then two, if it was going to create the potential for an unsafe working environment. And I know that you've endorsed this policy for our own city, and so could you share with us sort of what your response would be to both of those, at least just for the city, about if it creates a lot of extra work for us, and then second, if it puts anybody at risk?
Yeah, Mark Washington. Our experience here has been very favorable with the ban-the-box, or our version of fair chance hiring, in that we have not had to administratively evaluate the applications or the backgrounds of people upon application, but have waited until we've gotten to the job offer, and made sure that we had a suitable candidate. But as a public employer, I noticed one of the recommendations was utilizing the records from DPS. We're able to get that access from DPS. I'm not sure the ability of other private employers to do that, but they already have background processes in place. And so I think what they ask is just to wait to deploy their process until the end of the interview upon job offer. So our experience has been very favorable.
Thanks.
Any other questions?
Thank you all for being here this afternoon. I guess my question is, where do you see the biggest pushback coming from? Which private providers or private entities do you see a pushback coming from? Because you said Target does it. Did you say Walmart?
Walmart,
Walmart?
I think you said the Koch brothers too.
Let me just say that I anticipate the most pushback being from people that aren't really educated about what this is about. A lot of people misconceive this as us trying to tell them by policy who they can or cannot hire, or whether or not they can give a background check. And this is really just about giving people a chance to be judged based on the merits and their job qualifications and not necessarily their history. Because if you see that I've checked that I have a criminal history, whether it's conscious or not, you're probably going to put my application to the side. If you see, based on my qualifications and my merits, that you would like to interview me and you have a chance to talk to me face to face, then my chances for being hired for that position are a little bit higher with each step of the process. And that also gives me a face-to-face opportunity to explain that maybe I did something when I was young and stupid, just like many people did. Maybe they didn't get caught for it. Doesn't mean we should all have a lifetime of consequences for it. So I anticipate the biggest pushback being from people that don't really understand what we're trying to do here. There might also be some pushback from some of the private employers, but again, I think that it's a matter of education and showing them that this is not taking their authority of their hiring process away from them.
So with the education piece, do you anticipate the education piece starting first and then enacting the ordinance, or enacting the ordinance that says this is what the city of Austin expects, and then educate?
I think it's a package deal. I think we roll it out kind of informing people where we're framing that narrative and not letting media sensationalize things in a far-off land. And then, as we roll it out, we give people the tools that they need. We give them access to people that have the answers to the questions. And also, again, the Reentry Planning Council has a employment presentation. We're happy to come and answer questions. We're happy to collaborate with the city in any way that we can to help this be a successful initiative.
Of course, I support this. It's almost in my community, like if your name is Jane, you get your application goes through. If it's Joanna, it doesn't. So I understand how just some small things like even a name and a check on a box will put a pile and discard, and somebody else will get through to the next level. But it's just something to think about as to how it's rolled out, and because we will have people that say this is our right as an employer to do this.
Is.
And so we need to just be aware of how that needs to be handled.
Right. And so
also, I did mention that we've been talking with the National Employment Law Project, and their senior attorney has helped many other groups implement this in 100 other cities in the U.S. And so she's happy to help us as well. But we have thought about having the education piece and a bit of a buffer, so it's not the next day somebody's not doing it, we're hitting them with some sort of penalty, but a bit of a buffer to talk to folks about this.
And do you have on your committee those representatives of Target and Walmart who are willing to also talk to private employers?
So I'm not sure if we have exact representatives from Target or Walmart, but we definitely do have private employers who are happy to talk about how they're already doing this or how they support this.
Because it's one thing to have the city or the state or the county do it. It's a whole different ballgame when you talk about private industry. So it's always helpful to have someone that speaks their language to be able to deliver that message to them.
Absolutely, and we definitely do have people to say we're already doing this. It's not something to be afraid of. Yeah.
Councilmember Poole.
So it sounds to me like it's really a sequence change and shift that you're asking for, rather than having the box there on the job application. You move and having that call you out. You have that background check, criminal background check done at the point where somebody is being considered for the hire. So it would save money for employers because it'd be fewer people that they'd have to run the background check on. It seems like almost like I'm so glad that Councilmember Kassar brought this up, and I fully support it, and I think I was one of the co-sponsors on it too. And I worked for the Employment Commission. My first job in state government was it's now called the Workforce Commission, but the Employment Commission. And what I saw there happening was that even though people who who have been prosecuted and served their time in jail or in prison, it's like a scarlet letter A. It follows them, even though the whole idea about going to prison is that you're paying it's a penalty, and you're paying, that penalty is then you've served your time and you're supposed to be made whole, but it does seem like that cloud follows you throughout. And so I'm really glad that we're working on this initiative. I wish you all the best. I think it's a really good one. I'll continue to support it and try to help you all however you would need that. And I think it's one of the clearest cut ways that we can show people who have paid their debt to society that we believe that they have, and we support them in becoming productive and hopefully someday also be able to vote again, because I think that also is taken away from people who are sent to prison. So has that changed? Does anybody know? Can you get your voting rights back?
If you are not on parole or probation, then you have the right to vote. So,
okay.
But if you are still under parole or probation supervision, then you have to wait until that is finished.
Okay, thanks for that.
One more thing.
So thank you.
And when I'm doing voter registration, before I became a city council person, I would always say, "Are you off paper?" And they knew exactly what that meant. And they'd say, "No, I'm not yet." I said, "Well, as soon as you're off paper, then you can register. So please don't get defeated by that." One other thing is that I know you've completed your public process, but there's a Latrice Cook who is part. I would like for her to be included in the loop as you all begin to kind of roll this out.
Definitely love Latrice.
Councilmember Kassar?
And Councilmember Houston, I think there may have been somebody from Melge at one of the meetings, and I think at our initial one, but we'll make sure that she's looped in, because I think this is one part of the process, but another part is after passing this kind of policy that doesn't guarantee that we get folks into the jobs, and we need to get people trained and prepared and recruited into employment. So I think that she plays a vital role in that, just like a lot of other folks will. So,
well, thank y'all so much for that presentation and for being here today. And I guess we'll have a follow-up on this issue on our next committee agenda in, is that October? So thank you so much.